When those first few notes hit, the crowd didn't just cheer, they roared. SmackDown has never been this loud, this electric. This return might be the best one yet. It wasn't just a noise. You have to understand that. We hear noise all the time. We hear pyro. We hear entrance music. We hear the mandated cheers for the heroes and the boos for the villains. We are conditioned to respond. But this was something else entirely. This was a rupture in reality. For a single agonizing second, there was only confusion. The first few ethereal notes of her song. A song no one had heard in 3 years. Hung in the air, unrecognized. Then a single person in section 112 screamed. A genuine, piercing shriek of realization. It acted like a spark. What followed wasn't a cheer, it was a detonation. It was the sound of 3 years of frustration, of what-ifs, of arguments on forums, of she's never coming back. It was the sound of thousands of people realizing they were witnessing a miracle. The pressure in the building changed. You could feel the air compressing. People weren't just screaming at the entrance, they were screaming with each other. Strangers grabbed one another by the shoulders, eyes wide, mouths agape, pointing at the ramp, tears already forming. The sound wasn't just loud, it was physical. It vibrated in your chest, rattling the camera lenses. This wasn't applause. This was a collective gasp turning into a seismic event. This was the sound of hope being rewarded. And in the center of the ring, the current champion, Silas, who had been busy running down the entire division, froze. Her manufactured confidence, her scripted arrogance, just evaporated. The microphone slipped an inch from her mouth. She didn't turn around. She didn't dare. She knew, just from the sound alone, that her entire world had just ended. And then she walked out. Reyna. She didn't look the same. She wasn't the brash, colorful hero she was 3 years ago. She looked stark. She wore simple black gear, her hair pulled back tight. The only color was the deep, angry red of the surgical scar that traced its way down her shoulder, a scar she made no attempt to hide. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her arms to play to the crowd. She just stood there, on the top of the ramp, letting that deafening roar wash over her. It was the most powerful pose in all of wrestling. Absolute stillness. The crowd's roar actually grew louder, trying to fill her silence, trying to make her react. They needed her to acknowledge them, to prove this was real. But Reyna wasn't looking at the crowd. Her eyes were fixed like lasers on the champion in the ring, on Silas, the woman who had built her entire career on the ashes of Reyna's, the woman who held the title that Reyna never lost. Silas finally, slowly, turned around, the color drained from her face. This wasn't part of the show. This wasn't on the call sheet. This was a ghost walking out of the fog. Reyna began the walk. It was slow, deliberate. Each step was a hammer blow, punctuated by the unified roar of the arena. She climbed the steps, she stepped through the ropes, and she stood, inches from the champion. The noise was unbearable, and Reyna, she just tilted her head, a silent question. No, not a question. A statement. I'm home. Silas, shaking, lifted the championship belt, as if it were a shield. Reyna just looked at the gold, then back at Silas's eyes, and almost smiled. It was the smile of a predator. Backstage, it was a graveyard. Every other wrestler, the ones who were supposed to be in the next segment, the ones who had main events planned for the next 6 months, were crowded around the gorilla position monitor. But they weren't cheering. They were silent. The air was thick with dread. You see, when a star of that magnitude returns, it's not a celebration for everyone. It's a power shift. The woman who was the next big thing, the one groomed for Silas's spot. Her face was pale. She just watched her entire year-long push evaporate. She knew, everyone knew, that the script was now meaningless. All roads now led to Reyna. The veterans, the ones who had been around for a decade, they just nodded slowly. They recognized the look in Rayna's eyes. It wasn't the look of someone happy to be back. It was the look of someone who had been to war and had returned to settle a score. They saw the scar. They saw the lack of fanfare. They saw the business in her walk. One of them muttered to another, "She's not back for the fans. She's back for blood." The rest of the locker room was instantly divided. There were those who respected her, who were in awe of the moment, and there were those who were terrified. They were terrified because they knew Rayna wasn't just better than them. She was hungrier. She had lost everything, which meant she had absolutely nothing left to lose. The Whisper Network was already firing. "Did you know? Who approved this? Is she even cleared?" The silence backstage was louder than the roar in the arena. In the production truck, it was pure chaos. Headsets were crackling with panicked voices. Who cut her music? Is she supposed to be here? The lead producer, a man who prided himself on running the tightest ship in sports, was just staring at his monitor, speechless. The main event segment, the contract signing they had promoted for 3 weeks, was supposed to be happening right now. But no one was cutting away. How could they? The director was screaming, "Stay on her! Stay on Silas! Get a close-up on the belt! Get the crowd!" On the desk, the script for the rest of the show sat, its pages suddenly feeling like a joke. The producer slowly picked up the stack of papers and just let them fall to the floor. Confetti of a story that no longer mattered. "Get me the boss. Now," he finally said, his voice quiet. This wasn't a planned surprise. This wasn't a clever storyline. This was a hostile takeover. Rayna hadn't just returned. She had hijacked $1 billion broadcast. The advertisers who had paid for the next segment would be furious. The network would be demanding answers. But the producer, he was also a fan. He saw the numbers climbing on the broadcast feed. The social media engagement meter was flashing bright red, overloading the system. They were breaking records, in real time. "Forget the script," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Forget the next segment. Just keep the camera on her. We are making history." The entire creative direction of the company was ripped up, tossed aside, and rewritten in the span of that one 30-second walk to the ring. We see the roar. We feel the electricity. But we don't see the cost. For Rayna, that roar was built on 3 years of agonizing silence. A minimalist animation, a stick figure in a sterile white room, lifting a small weight and dropping it. A grimace. We think of returns as triumphant. We forget the work. We forget the 4 a.m. alarms in an empty house. The grueling physical therapy sessions where progress is measured in millimeters. The moments of absolute despair, staring at a ceiling, her shoulder screaming in agony, convinced she would never lift her arm again, let alone another human being. We forget the doctors who told her, "You had a great career, Rayna, but it's time to think about after." That roar wasn't just for her. It was for this. It was for every time she fell and got back up in an empty gym, with no one watching, no one cheering. She didn't return for the fame. She had that. She didn't return for the money. She was set. She returned because her end was written by someone else. It was written by Silas's reckless ambition in that final match. It was written by the surgeons who saw her as a broken piece of equipment. She returned because she refused to let that be her final chapter. That walk down the ramp wasn't a celebration. It was the final, painful step of a marathon that started the second she woke up from anesthesia. The crowd was roaring for her arrival. She was just, finally, at the finish line. And then, there's the pressure of the moment itself. The reason she kept it a secret from everyone, the company, her family, her friends, was because she couldn't bear the weight of their hope. What if she tried and failed? What if the shoulder wasn't strong enough? The rumor of a return would have been a prison. The "when are you coming back?" questions would have broken her. It was easier to let the world think she was gone, to let them write the "Where are they now?" articles. It was easier to be a tragic memory than a potential failure. By disappearing, she gave herself the one thing she needed to heal: permission to fail. Now, standing in that ring, that silence she had cultivated was shattered by the loudest noise she had ever heard. And in that noise, a new, heavier burden was born. The expectation. The crowd wasn't roaring for Raina, the person. They were roaring for Raina, the idea, the invincible, untouchable legend they remembered. They were roaring for the savior who was going to fix the product they had grown tired of. They wanted the old Raina. But the old Raina was gone. The old Raina died on an operating table. This new version, the one standing there with a dead-eyed stare and a map of scar tissue on her body, was harder, colder, and she knew, with dreadful certainty, that the same crowd roaring for her return would be the first to turn on her if she couldn't live up to the ghost they had created in her absence. By the next morning, it wasn't a wrestling story. It was the story. It was the lead-in on sports networks, debated by analysts who hadn't spoken the company's name in years. They weren't just showing the clip. They were analyzing it. They were analyzing the sound, the decibel level, the way the champion, Silas, crumpled without a single punch being thrown. "This," one analyst said, his voice hushed, "is the definition of a game changer. This is what happens when a mythology becomes real." Her name was the #1 trend in the world, in every language. People who hadn't watched the show in a decade were uploading reaction videos, many of them in tears, trying to explain to their partners or kids why this moment mattered. It was a cultural touchstone. It represented something everyone craves, a genuine, unspoiled surprise in a world that reveals everything. But for the company, it was a logistical nightmare. The arena for the next show sold out in 45 seconds. The network was demanding she appear on every morning show. Toy companies were demanding new action figures. And all of it, was centered on a woman who hadn't spoken a single word. She had become the most valuable commodity in entertainment overnight, all by simply standing still. The pressure was mounting. The world wasn't just watching, it was leaning in. And Raina. She remained silent. She was letting the echo of that roar do the talking for her. Miles away, in a small, darkened house, an old man sat in a worn-out recliner. The television was on, but the volume was low. This was Raina's father, a legend from a bygone era, a man whose body was a roadmap of his own brutal career. He wasn't watching the sports networks. He was watching a grainy cell phone recording of the return, uploaded by a fan in the front row. He watched it once. Then he hit rewind. He watched it again. He wasn't watching his daughter. He was watching the crowd. He was watching the faces in the front row, the unbridled joy, the shock, the release. He saw the man in the business suit grab the kid in the wrestling shirt, both of them screaming, unified. He'd spent his whole life chasing that sound. It was a drug. It was the sound that validated all the broken bones, the missed birthdays, the years on the road. He had tried to explain it to Raina when she was young, that this was the real prize, not the gold belts. He never thought he'd hear a sound like that again. Not in this new, polished corporate era. A single tear traced a line through the old scars on his cheek. He hit rewind again. He wasn't proud of her for returning. He was proud of her for commanding. He was proud that she had learned the hardest lesson, that the greatest power isn't in what you do in the ring, but in what you make the crowd feel. She hadn't just come back. She had taken control. The show ended. The cameras went dark. The crowd filed out, still buzzing, voices hoarse. The arena was empty, save for the crew cleaning up the confetti from a celebration that now seemed trivial. Raina wasn't in the locker room. She wasn't with the trainers. She was in the general manager's office, sitting in his chair, her feet up on his desk, still in her gear. The GM, the man responsible for the entire show, stood opposite her, wringing his hands, a forced smile on his face. "Rena," he stammered. That was incredible. The numbers are, welcome back. We need to talk about your contract. We need to talk about Silas. The main event at the pay-per-view is yours. Anything you want." Rena just stared at him. Her gaze was flat. "I don't want Silas," she said, her voice quiet, hoarse. The first words she'd spoken all night. The GM blinked. I don't understand. She's the champion. She's the one who... She's a symptom," Rena cut him off. "She's just the one you put in my place." She leaned forward, the smile from the ring gone, replaced by something chilling. "I'm not back for a match," she said. "I'm back for your job. I'm back for the company that pushed me too hard, that cleared me when I wasn't ready, that called my injury bad luck instead of negligence. I'm back for the system that used me and discarded me." She stood up. "Silas can keep the belt. I don't care about the prop. I'm here for the power. My contract, my lawyers will be sending it. You're not my boss anymore." We, the audience, were so focused on the return, we missed the reason. We saw the confrontation with the champion and assumed the story. Hero returns. Hero challenges champion. Hero wins. It's the story we've been told 1,000 times. But this was different. That deafening roar from the crowd wasn't just for Rena. It was a roar of frustration. It was a collective scream from an audience that had grown tired of the predictable scripts, the safe champions, and the corporate-approved storylines. They weren't just cheering for her. They were cheering for the chaos she represented. They were cheering because, for the first time in years, they had no idea what was going to happen next. That moment on the ramp, it wasn't just a wrestler returning. It was the soul of the business returning. It was the return of danger, of authenticity, of genuine, unscripted emotion. Rena's return was the ultimate twist. We thought she came back to reclaim her championship. But we were wrong. She came back to expose the game, to change the rules. The crowd wasn't roaring because their hero was back. They were roaring because they finally had a leader. They were roaring because the predictable, safe corporate world they had been forced to accept had just been set on fire. And the woman holding the match wasn't just a legend. She was a revolutionary. And her war, it had only just begun.